you are the descendants of Polish Jews, so I assume that most of you are following some parts of this news coming from Poland. By the way, I'm now in Warsaw, so greetings from Warsaw. Well, the background is, I don't know how far you want me to go. It's a question of how in-depth an analysis you want me to get involved in. But on a very, let's say, on a very initial level of introduction, let me tell you that what happens in Poland today is simply a sort of a continuation of a problem that has been present in the Polish society since World War II, and which sort of, goes from generation, perpetuates from generation to generation. And the problem is inability to come to terms with the place of the Holocaust in Polish history, with the fate of Polish Jews, inability of Polish society to think critically, also assess critically its own role in the fate of the Jews. So these are these issues which, as you know probably as well as I do, come to the surface time and again and again and again and again. If you look at the 1956 debates, you will have Polish righteous being, presented as a typical choice of Polish masses during the war. Then you have 68, the same kind of thing. For me, what was shocking, I was my father, who was a survivor of the Holocaust, who passed away 4.5 years ago. When I was cleaning up his desk when he passed away, and I came across, my father kept his Jewish identity very much close to his own chest, so to say. In any case, there was this letter he wrote in 1973, 50 years ago, a letter to a Polish writer in response to some kind of an article. And my father in 1973 wrote, about his frustration with this inability of Polish society to come to terms with these things which happened, which he witnessed, which he was part of. And when I took this letter of my father from 1973, and I said, goodness gracious, I can publish the same letter today without one word being changed in 2021. These things simply did not change. So this is as an introduction that the history of the Shoah, of the fate and extermination of the Polish Jews, has become a huge unresolved Polish problem, not Jewish problem, it's Polish problem, so instead of somehow addressing the issue, Polish society, and here I have to tell you, whether you are dealing with people who are fascists and anti-Semites, and there are many, or you are dealing with Democrats who are in the center, or you are dealing with left-wing people, they sort of unite in their willingness to defend something that's being called the good name of the Polish nation. And in defense of this this is perhaps the last area where the politically split Polish society today comes together. So in order to defend these myths, as Karen mentioned, legislation has been put in place, laws have been enacted, there are criminal provisions still on the books for people who defame or allegedly defame this name. So criminal provisions which have been used against my friend Professor Jan Grabowski, which have been threatening other journalists and historians, or the civil procedure, the civil lawsuits as it happened in my case. So Karen, would you like me now to expand on the book or not?
Yes, I'd like to know exactly the details behind the case, what you are accused of.
All right, look, so here is, I brought from my shelf, oops, it's a heavy book, it's called Night Without End, dalej jest noc, losy Żydów w wybranych powiatach okupowanej Polski, the fates of the Jews in selected counties of occupied Poland. Now, these are very large two volumes, as Karen mentioned, 1,700 pages. Here you have my pen so you can see how thick the thing is. In any case, this is a very serious academic study. Last thing you would like to read, I assure you. I mean, please do if once it's in English, but it will be a shortened version in English. In any case, this is a fruit of 6 years of hard work of a team of historians, which I and my colleague assembled together. What we tried to do is basically to look beyond the usual statements. Many people did this, some people did that. We went on the level of microhistory. So we wanted to look what happened to Jews in these selected counties. And we looked at few things. I asked all of my people, so to say, to look at the fates of the Jews in their county, but to focus on a few things. One of them was the so-called Aktionen. Now, the Aktionen were the liquidation actions about which we know preciously little. These are basically the moments, days, hours, sometimes weeks, as in Warsaw, when the Germans liquidate the ghettos. In other words, they herd the Jews to death trains, they deliver them to the death sites at Majdanek, Treblinka, Sobibór, Bełżec, and so on, Auschwitz. So what I wanted, in the case of this micro research, I asked my authors to look at all possible evidence, and we went through the archives on 3 continents, excluding Australia, I hate to say, but we were in many other archives around the world, and trying to find, I said, look hour after hour, what happened to the Jews during these liquidation actions about which we knew little. And then we wanted to look at the fate of the Jews who were not taken to death sites, who fled these liquidation actions and who tried to survive among the so-called Aryan society, among Christians who went into hiding. So what we found, we were looking at the Jews, but of course the Jews were not functioning, they were fighting for their lives in a context of this society, Polish, sometimes Ukrainian society, and in the context of the German policy of extermination. So what we found out, among many other things, was this agency of the Jews who were fighting with fury for their lives in situations against all possible horrifying circumstances, displaying unbelievable own agency in trying to survive. So we looked at ways in which they tried to conceal themselves, to survive on the surface, using Aryan documents, in any case, multitude of these things. And then we looked at and then with the other findings included horrifying descriptions of the actions and participation of local populations in these liquidations actions. It could have been Polish voluntary firefighters who joined in with the Germans in order to find the Jews desperately hiding in the ghettos or fleeing the ghettos. It could be Polish blue policemen who were involved in these hunts. It could have been simple Poles or Ukrainians who simply chose to, usually robbery was the main motive, or prizes offered by the Germans. In any case, we found out, because we went after numbers too, we found that close to 70% of Jews who had a working chance to survive were either killed or denounced to the Germans by their Christian neighbors. And we found this massive involvement of local populations in the liquidations of the ghetto, and so on and so forth. Now, so there were so many other things. I don't have even the time to go over them, but the book is rich with detail. It's certainly the most complete study of the Jewish fates during the Holocaust in Poland since World War II. Arguably one of the most serious ones ever written in terms of completeness of our knowledge of this stage of the Holocaust. And the book, so the book landed on the bookshelves in Poland in exactly 3 years ago, which was splashed right in the middle of the affair with the Polish Holocaust law, which Karen mentioned, which is this so-called the renewed legislation regarding the Institute of National Remembrance, the one that foresaw introduced the prison terms of up to 3 years for people who falsely accuse the Polish nation of complicity in German crimes. I quote nearly from my mind. So this book landed in the midst of this furious debate surrounding the Polish Holocaust law, and it triggered extraordinary violent reaction on the part of the Polish state and NGOs and people aligned, patriots, so-called patriots, and simply employees of the state. So I can explain later on why, but I will, perhaps you have a question.
Yeah, well, can you tell us how you ended up in court?
Okay. Okay, so to give you now, to bring you now to this court case. Now, the thing is that this Polish Holocaust law has been, it was said, defanged, okay? It was decriminalized. They, under tremendous this international pressure, the Polish nationalists, the government, they removed the criminal provisions at the end of June of 2018, okay? It was done with ill will, grudgingly, under tremendous US pressure. So they removed this thing. At the same time, however, the Polish Prime Minister, his name is Mateusz Morawiecki, said that, well, under international pressure, we shall withdraw these criminalizing provisions. But look, we, the Polish state, have more than enough of tools in order to punish and to bankrupt people who slander the good name of the Polish nation, and we shall use civil litigation and NGOs sympathetic to our point of view. So he said it in the Polish parliament, exactly these words. And what you see later on is the implementation of Polish Prime Minister's threat executed with the help of something that an organization, but actually quite a few organizations, massively funded by the Polish state, by the way. So this Polish League Against Defamation, but there are other organizations lined up, which sort of serve as a proxy for the Polish state. So what happened here is these organizations funded by the Polish state went, there were many of them. One of the most powerful is the Institute of National Remembrance, which formed a special detachment of historians or other employees whose only role was to look at each and every footnote, trying to find an error or two or three or four in order to discredit our reputation, to destroy our reputation of all the authors. So this was one, and the publishing quite nonsensical, without large knowledge of the thing. Reviews or so-called reviews in all possible languages. Money was not a problem for the IPN. Now, this readout of the so-called readout of defense of the good name of the Polish nation, or this Polish Anti-Defamation League, also went after the footnotes, and once they thought that they had a smoking gun in their hands, and they found in a remote village a person who was related to a person that they thought we slandered in this book, a mayor, a village elder from a remote eastern village in eastern Poland. And the lady, the elderly lady in question, she was a niece of the long deceased village elder, filed a lawsuit that we, actually my colleague, Professor Barbara Engelking, in her chapter, in one passage of her chapter, slandered the good name of her uncle, because as the lawsuit stipulated, the uncle not only didn't hurt the Jews, as Professor Engelking claimed, but he actually helped them. And to which, this readout, or the Polish Anti-Defamation League, they have here proofs, and this is how the lawsuit got launched. So here we were accused. I was accused, actually, it's very curious because I was not even accused as an author. I was accused as an editor. In other words, the plaintiffs assumed that editor of an academic book has not only to check each and every footnote in a collective work, but he actually has to go to the archives later on and check each and every citation against the documents held in the archives. It's of course absurd, but it demonstrates to you the real reason, which was to go after me, because I became pretty unpopular with these people for quite some time, and they wanted to basically put me on the spot. So what happens here, the trial starts, and Karen, over to you.
Okay, when you released the book, what sort of response were you expecting?
Well, the thing is that the book was 6 years in the making. We were ready with the book a long time before the Polish Parliament, in its wisdom, decided to legislate this absurd Polish Holocaust law. So we knew, of course, that there will be reaction, but the fury of this reaction surprised us all. I mean. It's, the thing is that the level of permission for speech of hate, which occurred back then, was something that I would never have anticipated. I mean, imagine you have mainstream, very much right wing, but that still is in Poland today very much very much mainstream. I have the dubious honor of being 4 times last week in a major massive circulation weekly on the front page, my face with the words falsifier of history, or things like this. So this and my colleagues' faces in the main edition of the Polish state TV news. So this is something unprecedented. Actually, as a historian, I could say should enjoy this, because imagine any other country where the authorities would be crazy enough to assign such importance to history. I don't know how it's in Australia. I don't think that Australian Prime Minister would go out of his way in order to pinpoint as a traitor of the nation and the enemy of the people a historian working at a local university. But this is what happens here. So no, we didn't anticipate anything like this. We knew that there would be a reaction, but nothing of the sort. The problem is that this slide of Poland into autocracy and let's say the destruction of the civil society underwent such a swift acceleration that something that was absolutely impossible to fathom, to imagine in 2015, today is simply a matter of course. And I'll talk about this later on. But so we found ourselves in the middle of, it's not part of my job description to be in court, right? Shouldn't be part of description of any historian. So we find ourselves in court, and I had a crash course in and of course, I'll write about it one day. This is the way historians act. We write about these things. So we find ourselves with a team of 2 lawyers who work graciously pro bono, because we don't, I and my colleague, we don't have really the resources to pay very, very pricey and very costly defense mechanisms in these lawsuits. So working pro bono with us, and we sort of have to now acquire knowledge. What are we being accused of? And how we should defend ourselves. What is the possible course of action? And the deeper we went into this story, the more troubling it became. Now imagine, at the bottom of the story at the center of the story is a Jewish survivor, like perhaps some of your families, okay? Her name is Estera, you don't have to know her family name. So Estera is living in hiding, and then she emerges from hiding, and a local village elder actually robs her clean, but at the same time, he sends her for forced labor to Germany. For very many Polish Jews being sent as forced laborers, of course, pretending to be Poles, to Germany in 1942 or 43 was a ticket to life, okay? Now, for the village elder, he got his money, he robbed her, and then also he fulfilled a quota. because each and every village had to send someone to Germany to work. People didn't want it. So if you have a volunteer, at the same time, you can kill two birds with one stone. You get rid of this Jewish person whom you have robbed, and you fulfill your obligation toward the German state. Now, the thing is that this Jewish woman visited during the war still. She visited the village on more than one occasion, and she learned that the village elder actually was complicit in delivering into the hands of the Germans a group of 22 Jews hiding in a forest, who later had been killed by the Germans. And time goes on, and in 1950, this village elder is being denounced to the authorities, not by her, but by his own neighbors, as someone who did bad things during the occupation and also denounced the Jews. There is a long trial. Our Jewish woman, she is testifying on behalf of this mayor, okay, on behalf of this village elder. And she says, no, he was, friendly person. He helped the Jews, this and that. Now, many years later, she went to Sweden, where she established herself, and she said that she was terrified. She was at the time in Polish court. She was threatened, and she was acting under duress. And at this stage, she wanted actually to save her skin and the skin of this village elder. And in Sweden, she gave a very long, 5-hour-long testimony about what happened really in that village. And here my colleague chose to go knowing very well what's the dynamic of these court cases, how the Jews testified under duress, especially the Jews who stayed after the Kielce pogrom, were very likely, such as, for instance, my father's family, my father. These people said, look, we are not going to testify against Poles who murdered the Jews. We made a conscious decision. If after 1946 you stick around, that means that you want basically to lay low, that you want to be one of the mainstream society. In any case, you have two versions, and now the court had to decide what has happened, whether a historian can assess the importance of the sources of a Jewish testimony versus court depositions, court documents of 1950. So, I can go on and on, but if you have a question, Karen, please fire away.
Thank you. I guess your unofficially your crime was contradicting the narrative of the Polish legend. And I was wondering, can you tell us what is the official Polish story of World War II?
Okay, well, the Polish mythology, I call it, or legends, you have to, I have been finally born and raised in Poland. I have been raised in Polish, went through the entire educational stream in Polish school and then university. And you know it probably very well too, but at the very core of Polish national identity is the idea that World War II has been the time not only of sacrifice, but of absolutely highest moral standards of the Polish society being preserved, okay? The narrative goes, have been victims of brutal and ruthless German occupation, which is entirely true. We have been occupied and mass murdered by the Soviets on the one hand, by the Nazis on the other hand. We were the innocent victims of history. And around this narrative, generations have been schooled, have been formed with this narrative being at the very core of what each and every Polish child actually knows about their own identity. Now, the fact that starting very recently, starting with Jan Tomasz Gross's book about the Jedwabne affair, murder, which has been published just 20 years ago, suddenly historians started to deliver information that, unfortunately, indeed, Polish society, however much victimized by the occupier, still was a victimizer of even of the most fragile, of the most vulnerable part of this society, which were the Jews. And in terms of Jan Tomasz Gross and his book, he debated a case of small town where Polish population, part of Polish population, murdered all their Jewish neighbors they could lay their hands on and burned them alive in a barn. Now, this created, of course, shock in Poland, but it was even accepted by the intelligentsia, by historians. It was rejected by let's say, by people who are not open to voice of facts and reason. But in any case, the idea was that, look, okay, even if this horrible thing happened, it was an isolated case in northeastern Poland. These people are very strange. In any case, it is not representative. If it was in Jedwabne, well, we have to admit, sorry, but this was a total exception and a total aberration. Now, what our book basically presented was that Jedwabne was a part of a very, very general pattern, that wherever you put your finger on a map, it will bleed. That the Jews, that all these desperate accounts that your grandparents or parents brought with them from Poland, that they were not invention, that the Germans killed 90% of the Jews. But what happened to the remaining 10%? The Polish society had a large say in this, in their tragedy. And these were not people, these were not aliens, not people unknown. These were neighbors. This was something that my colleague Professor Omer Bartow calls community genocide. In other words, you have neighbors killing neighbors, you have schoolmates killing schoolmates. And this is what makes this part of history so particularly horrifying. And it strikes at the core of Polish national myth. It diffuses it. And more importantly, it strikes at the area which is the only area of Polish history that anybody and anyone cares for outside of Poland. So the reaction of the authorities was at the crossroads of this, international exposure. People are talking about us in a bad way, and our core of our beliefs are, being here assaulted by these historians. So that's basically, the background to the story.
Right. Tell me, why did it take decades for research into Polish crimes against Jews to be carried out? Research such as your own and
yeah, the answer, Karen, is fairly. I mean, I hinted at it before. In other words, there is a consensus in the Polish society that certain things are not to be touched. And very often you will have this question, a Polish historian will tell you, look, but we have been under communist oppression for decades. There was no free speech, no free expression for decades and decades. Well, the problem is that in Poland, and I recall that time very well in the 1970s, and especially in the early 1980s, the underground presses were hot, running hot. Okay, you could write whatever you could, and there was a vibrant underground publishing, and historians were writing furiously about the Soviet occupation, about other things which were impossible to write openly about the communist takeover and so on. However, nobody had really any inclination whatsoever to tackle the issue of Polish complicity in the Holocaust. Very rare cases, even in 1987, I remember a professor of literature, one Mr. Błoński, published an, I would say, very innocent article called "The Poor Poles Look at the Ghetto," and in which he deliberated the issue of Polish anti-Semitism and this holding anger that erupted in 1987 after this article, that how dare he accuse Polish society of anti-Semitism, something which is, I would say, fairly obvious. So, but still, from accusations or discussions about anti-Semitism to a leap to Polish complicity or complicity of segments of Polish society in the Holocaust, there is a long, long and winding road. So this, I would say that this is, as I mentioned before, this rejection of this notion of involvement in the Holocaust is the last area where Poles come together as one family in denial of historical evidence. And this we have seen in court. I will tell you more about this if you want in a moment, about the outcome and so on. But this was very, very visible in court too.
Right. All right. Just returning to anti-Semitism, I'd like to know if there's a deep vein of anti-Semitism behind the current historical revisionism. Or is anti-Semitism a driving force behind the Polish narrative, or do collateral damage to the national myth?
I would say that the anti-Semitism is not the driving force. It is present. It is, most of all, it is very frequently now used, tapped by the nationalists, very consciously. It will not bring a definite victory in elections, but it serves to consolidate the hardcore nationalistic electorate. So, but most importantly, anti-Semitism in Poland is a very strange phenomenon because there are no more Jews in Poland. I mean, I'm sorry, I excuse myself here if you are one of the 3,000 Jews who do live in Poland, but we are talking about a nation of Polish Jews which has been annihilated by the Germans as a people who had their own culture and language. They don't exist anymore. So what you have in Poland is what reverberates in let's say, through the society are certain code words which are steeped in anti-Semitic narrative, in anti-Semitic discourse. And so, for instance, recently, if you want to scare people, you can invoke the title Senate Resolution 447 of the US Senate about the restitution of Jewish property. It will trigger all possible reactions. You can't believe how strong. The Jews are coming back to claim what's theirs. No, what is ours? And then you will see that these levers are moved by the authorities and people authorized by them in a very diligent way. Code words, cosmopolitan influence is of course a code word for Jewish influence. And then when you have just a few years ago, the crisis of the refugee and migrant crisis in Europe, the whole imaginary world of anti-Semitism has been made available in the same terms. I mean, that were used in 1930s and 1940s against the Jews were now applied word for word against Muslim refugees from the south. Although no refugees reached Poland, but the fear it did. And more recently, in the last debate, presidential debate last year, the nationalists chose another object of hate because it's very easy for them to mobilize people against something, a minority. So they mobilized themselves and their allies against gays and lesbians. It was a major part of the electoral campaign was this thrust against this rotten culture of the West, which wants to destroy Polish family. Once again, the whole world of metaphor was taken straight from the 1930s anti-Semitic cliches. So even if you have sometimes not direct anti-Semitism, you can always sense its presence. So it is, and the phenomenon is that you have this presence in a country, I repeat it again, without Jews.
Mm, mm. Generally speaking, how strong is the trend, at least towards historical revisionism around Europe at the moment?
What we see in Europe generally, and even beyond European borders, is the resurgence of nationalism and authoritarian rule. We have this backsliding democracies. You can see it in Poland, you can see it in Hungary, you can see very strong tendencies towards historical revisionism in Ukraine, of course, Turkey. I'm not even using Turkey and Russia as examples because they are so flagrant examples of gross violation of human rights associated with violation of historical truth. But they are, let's say, I'm still limiting myself to countries which aspire to the name of democracies, okay? So that's why I focus Hungary and Poland, to an extent Ukraine. So this revisionism is very widespread. It is touching mostly on the countries of Eastern and Central Europe, but not only. The fact that what really changes now, it has very often Holocaust at the core, and it is state-sponsored, okay? So in the past, we had revisionists who were, writing things, not a new phenomenon, but their influence from the point of view of history professors as myself was minimal. I mean, Holocaust denial was a reservation of few strange fools, right? People who were not taken seriously by anyone for a long time now. However, what the new revisionism does, it goes the way, so-called way of Holocaust distortion, or as Yehuda Bauer, the dean of Holocaust research and studies from Israel, says, it is an attempt by the local authorities to write themselves a usable history, a history they can use, so they rewrite it. The problem, the deadly difficult problem, is that unlike the revisionists of the past, the revisionism today is being sponsored by limitless resources of the state. And in Poland, I can tell you that only this one institute of national remembrance, which is a sort of a combination of historical institute, cum prosecutorial institution with prosecutors on staff, vast array of people working for them, hundreds of historians with doctorates, and a budget of translating into Australian dollars, let me see if I get it right, 160,000 million Australian dollars per annum, just basically to intervene in the field of history whenever the authorities feel fit. So this is the kind of background here. And then we go to trial. And if you want, I can tell a few words about the outcome.
Sure, please, go ahead.
Okay, so what happens is, as Karen mentioned, just, to bring us here to some kind of, to let you to ask me questions if you have any. And so the court goes on, and deliberating. In the pandemic, it was not always obvious. In any case, when the verdict has been announced, it was, I mean, the plaintiffs wanted us basically to apologize, saying that we wanted to slander the good name of the Polish nation, that we concocted evidence that we are guilty of this and that. And they wanted us to pay to the widow 100,000 zlotys, which is about 2 years' salary in Poland, which is a very significant amount of money in Poland. It's about 40,000 kind of Australian dollars, but in Poland it's 2 years' salary. So the court, the district court in Warsaw, the judge, she decided that we don't have to pay any compensation, but that we do have to offer apologies of not having displayed due diligence in our assessment of the facts at hand. Now, it was just a few weeks ago, we received a written justification which went even further. Now, so what the judge declared, without any knowledge on her part of the documents in question, the court intervened in matters which the court never should intervene. She told us basically that if we are confronted with one kind of sources and another kind of sources, which tell contradictory things, we cannot, as historians, offer any hypothesis. We cannot say what has happened if these sources, Polish court case from 1950 and Jewish testimony from 1990, if they say something that contradicts one another, we as historians are not allowed to make any kind of judgment. Judgment call. That was one part, which is absolutely impossible to, let's say, accept from historians' point of view, because at the core of my profession is that I am not the judge able to say what is the worth, what is the value of this Jewish testimony or any other testimony, because I have spent decades and decades studying these documents, and I am able to say why one source is more credible than another. On a more disturbing even note, the judge then inserted in her opinion words that there are certain goods, rights, goods and rights which require and deserve legal civil protection. And she said here that one of them is the right to national pride. Another is the right to national identity and dignity. Now, this is opening of Pandora's box right away, because nobody defined in legal terms these expressions. What is actually this national pride? What is this national identity? These terms are not legally defined. Now, what happens now, should this sentence stand on appeal, which will happen over the next half a year, I don't know, perhaps few months. If this sentence stands, then basically any Pole, he or she, who feels slandered or somehow hurt that her or his national pride has been exposed to wrong writing by me or anyone else, can bring a lawsuit in a court of law. Which of course means at this stage that critical history is no longer possible in Poland. And if you want to publish your book in Poland, you might want to think about it twice as well. And more importantly, it can reflect on the way in which other countries will look. It's a very convenient way of muzzling historians or sociologists or anyone else, because you follow not the criminal legislation, which is, not very nice to put people in prison and to do them harm. Here, you just ruin them. Who cares, right? So this is particularly insidious, and actually the reactions of the highest representatives of the Polish state were telling the Minister of Justice, expressing his delight in the light of upcoming appeal. If you have a Minister of Justice who expresses his delight with the lower court's decision, and the courts in Poland are under siege today, I don't think it augurs very well the future. So in any case, this is where we are today, and I hope that I made the situation more or less, transparent to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Just one last question before we go to the Q&A. Is there anything that those of us who live outside of Poland can do to help?
At this stage, what you can do, yes, there are certain things you can do. Polish diplomacy is very active. Confront them. Polish diplomats have been absolutely horrible in their attempts to malign our names, to slander us. I had no idea what the Polish embassy in Australia, probably nothing, because it's far away, but what they did in Berlin, what they did in Israel, it was in Germany and Israel, was absolutely awful. And once again, I should have sued them, but the thing is that I don't have the resources. So the thing is, if you see a Polish diplomats expressing themselves on the issue of the Holocaust, ask them, point blank, you should be ashamed of yourselves. Your government, you are involved in Holocaust distortion. This is one thing you can do, confront them. Second thing is this unfortunate creation, the Institute of National Remembrance, the IPN. They are sending exhibitions with falsify history left, right, and center. I'm pretty certain that their exhibitions are traveling to Australia too. Well, make them feel unwelcomed. For that, and that might be for starters. And then once the repression strikes the scholars here in Poland, we will have another debate, another discussion. Then, I am hopefully based in Canada, but I am a dual citizen, so I am responsible in front of authorities here too. But once these repressions, which I no doubt will occur, happen, we will need to think about perhaps raising funds for defense of people who will face these losses. I don't know.
Wow, sounds like there's a long road ahead, Professor Grabowski. I think that there will be some questions for you. Thank you very much. Lena, how are we going?
Hi, Karen. Yes, I've got a few questions. This is from Ezra. Is it a positive or a negative that Poland is discussing these issues? It seems other countries like Hungary, Lithuania, and Latvia don't even allow an acknowledgement of the possibility of their collaboration with the Nazis in the destruction of their Jewish population.
Well, I don't think we have a discussion in Poland. What we have is an outright attack, unfortunately. I mean, discussion would imply, academics or people of goodwill expressing various opinions. What you have here mm, is basically an attack that has been concocted and planned, but no doubt about it, by the authorities. So I wouldn't call it discussion. I would call it simply, a policy of the state at this stage. There is very little debate. I mean, among intellectuals, among historians, there is a consensus for the most of the time that what we wrote was what happened, right? So if with this distinction there is a battle of sorts, yes. A discussion, I wouldn't call it this way.
There is another question. Does the Polish opposition campaign against this issue, or is it deemed too politically sensitive to raise?
Well, I don't. The Polish politicians, opposition politicians, don't really get involved in this. The thing is, you can't win votes with this. In defending people who are writing critical history can only make you lose votes. There was. We have received a lot of support from intelligentsia, from colleagues. So even from Poland, which requires some, some courage nowadays. But I don't recall any kind of support given to us, to our little group of authors by any opposition political powers. Nothing official in any case.
Another question. Of late, intolerance against the other has been enabled by populist governments, including in Poland. Do you see in the disorganized opposition any hope for beating back the illiberalism manifest in Polish society?
Could you please once again, because something happened with my audio, I couldn't hear you.
Okay. The question is, of late, intolerance against the other has been enabled by populist governments, including in Poland. Do you see in brackets, disorganized opposition any hope for beating back the illiberalism manifest in Polish society?
Well, I would like to say yes, but the thing is that I am, once again, I don't like to speak out outside of my area of expertise. I'm not a politician. I'm not even a political commentator. I am just a conscious citizen. So from what I see, as you mentioned in your question, the opposition is deeply disorganized. Now they agree that let's for instance sexual minorities' rights should be defended, but even once the discussion goes to recognizing same-sex marriage, they are deeply split. So I fear that that this will be very much an uphill struggle. And I am talking here about things which normally we take for granted, such as same-sex marriage. And when you introduce the additional dimension, for instance, of adoptions for gay couples, well, this is completely still outside the horizon of possibility here. So I fear that this is a long way still away.
Another question. What is it about the Polish government that it thinks its people can't examine their history? We see the opposite in countries like America and Australia, where the population is leading the governments to examine their history of slavery and racism.
Well, once again, unfortunately here, this part of equation, of a problem. Here, the authorities are on a firm ground together with opposition, together with, I would say, vast majority of the Polish society, and the polls confirm it consistently. And the fact is that the votings on so-called dignity files, it's called in Polish sprawy godnościowe, dignity files, or that's exactly what we discussed today. These votes gather votes in the best case scenario. Opposition abstains from voting, but usually they vote together with the government. And so why it happens like this? Well, the problem is, once again, a lack of deep democratic roots and strong democratic institutions. Unfortunately, the Polish democracy, which is for me is very, very sad thing to say, has been very shallowly rooted. Okay, very shallow roots, and the removal of these democratic institutions happened very quickly. And I believe that democratic institutions are essential for critical history too, for critical examination of history. So you have a combination of factors: mythology, history construed as religion, plus you have absence of democratic institutions, and all of this comes together in a form of rejection of knowledge. And so comparing Poland to the States or to Canada, which are multicultural societies, by the way, which gives totally different dynamic, is simply, well, not the most fortunate way to go, unfortunately.
Another question. It seems like the PiS Polish government has its hands in every pie, controlling the judiciary and even in the Poland Museum. So what hope is there for a fair trial in Poland without political interference? The second question, second part of this question is, when will your book about the Polish Blue Police be translated into English?
Okay, so question number one, thank you, is I have no idea as to the outcome here of these trials. As I mentioned, the fact is that the judiciary, there are very, very courageous judges in Poland, but you cannot really expect people to be heroes all the time, not all of them. So there are still people defending, the judges defending the honor of independent judiciary, but many others are simply, choosing the path of lesser resistance. So I am very skeptical as to the future of these trials. And as far as my book is concerned, I'm happy to report that I finished translating. I always rewrite my books for the benefit of Anglo-Saxons or English reading audience. So I reworked this book a bit, and I hope I will later this month I will try to pitch it to publishing houses. And actually, I cannot even tell you to what publishing house, because the book, that I showed you, the big one, is translated, ready to go for production, and there were huge pressures exerted by the Polish authorities on the publisher to abandon publication of our book in English. So this is unfortunately the world that we live in. But in any case, my book on Blue Police, I hope should be out in English in the beginning of next year.
A new question. How important has the Catholic Church in Poland been in developing and sustaining this rigid defense of national Polish pride in the face of your and others' work on recent Holocaust history?
Well, the Polish Roman Catholic Church has been navigating quickly to the right for quite some time, and they are now one of the pillars on which the current authorities build on. Church has thrown its lot, no doubt about it, unequivocally, together with the nationalists. So anything that we hear from Catholic radio and Catholic press is basically repeating the vicious lies produced about us by the state media. Sometimes even worse. So in terms of the impact of church press, and there is many of it, and church TV, such as TV Trwam or Radio Mary and so on, they have been relentless in their attacks on us.
Does the Polish government also try to exert pressure on NGOs to change their Holocaust narrative?
Well, first of all, they fund the NGOs which are already loyal to the official narrative, and I believe that they are trying to. I know that they are starving to death NGOs which are not compliant. So, for instance, just yesterday, And the state has huge resources. Usually in the democratic society, you have these state institutions which are usually fairly independent, funding the NGOs on the basis of their past accomplishments and so on. In Poland, practically now totality of these memorial sources go to extreme or right-wing NGOs, leaving the other NGOs largely out of the equation. Just yesterday, there is something called the National Institute of Freedom. Don't let yourself be deluded by the name, which gave out grants to the NGOs, and two of the NGOs were simply deeply steeped in anti-Semitic tradition. So I mean, this is actually, I'm writing about this. It's unbelievable when you look at the kind of organizations that are getting support, and then of course, conversely, organizations which have a rich history of civic engagement receive no money at all.
One more question. What about university Holocaust education courses? We hear stories about the increasing number of non-Jewish Poles interested in this subject. Are these courses being changed?
No, I mean, one has to say that universities are still a bright spot on this map. They are being now also, let's say, under assault, put under assault, but universities preserved still their independence, and I have not heard about cancellations. I'm not exactly certain what they are teaching in these courses, but there seems to be quite a vibrant still inside the university world, quite a vibrant culture of discussion, and this is one of the now focal points of assault by the nationalists. There is a notorious fellow whose name is Czarnek, who became a few months back the Minister of Education and Science, whose one of his promises, so to say, was to basically restore dignity of Poland inside the universities. I quote him. So what will happen but for the time being, this education has been still largely preserved, from what I know.
Is that it, Lena?
One more question. How is the Holocaust being taught in schools in Poland?
Well, unfortunately, this I know more about because I have been teaching teachers. For several years, I came to Poland to teach teachers during special courses of improvement of their knowledge. So I met many of them. Now it has been made impossible for several years already by the authorities. But as long as I did it, and I stayed in touch, remained in touch with many teachers. So what goes on is pretty alarming. Now, the problem is that Polish curriculum has been reinforced by the nationalists to no end. There is the Holocaust, of course, is being discussed, but from the point of view of Poles helping the Jews to survive. Poles, righteous Poles, delivering help. And the shadows of what I do have not penetrated ever into the curricula. So basically, it is if you can imagine Holocaust being a feel-good story, it is a feel-good story that's being taught. It's an example of, once again, Polish society coming through and delivering helping hand to the Jews at the time of need. And this still, I was told, will change even further.
Karen, we've finished our questions.
Okay, thanks, Lena. And thank you, Professor Grabowski. It's been an honour to hear your views and to talk to you. And thank you to everyone watching. If you want to explore more about Polish Jewish affairs, please take a look at the ASPJ page on Facebook or our website at polishjews.org.au. Okay, thank you and good night.
Thank you very much for this invitation. It was a pleasure, and I wish you a wonderful, I believe, evening in your
Yes, thank you very much, and a wonderful day to you. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.